ParaEdPro is a professional training initiative designed to prepare paraprofessionals to function as educational practitioners, not as informal helpers or passive support staff. This work begins with a clear premise. Paraprofessionals are among the adults who spend the most time with students, and proximity creates responsibility. When that responsibility is not matched with professional training and clarity, students are underserved, often unintentionally. Traditional paraprofessional training tends to focus on compliance or task completion. ParaEdPro begins with professional identity, because how paraprofessionals understand their role shapes how they act, communicate, and support students. This work is grounded in the belief that students deserve well-prepared adults, and paraprofessionals deserve training that reflects the importance of the work they do. You are a professional. Act like one. Module 2, Identity Before Technique. In professional practice, technique is never the true starting point. Identity is. How you understand your role determines how you interpret expectations, how you respond in moments of ambiguity, and whether you act with clarity or hesitation. Many paraprofessionals receive training in strategies, behavior supports, instructional scaffolds, documentation protocols, yet no one pauses to ask how they see themselves within the educational hierarchy. When identity is unclear, technique becomes fragile. It is applied inconsistently, deferred unnecessarily, or abandoned under pressure. This module addresses that root issue. Before we refine methods, we must stabilize professional identity. Professional identity. We need to define this term carefully. Professional identity is your internalized understanding of who you are within your professional role, including your authority, your responsibilities, your boundaries, and your ethical obligations. For paraprofessionals, professional identity means understanding that you are a credentialed educational practitioner operating within a defined scope of practice, whose daily actions directly affect student access, learning, and regulation. It includes 3 core elements. First, role clarity, knowing what you are responsible for and what falls outside your role. Second, authority alignment, recognizing that your licensure, training, and proximity to students give you legitimate standing within instructional environments. Third, ethical steadiness, acting consistently in ways that protect student dignity and growth, even when moments are uncomfortable or ambiguous. Professional identity is not ego. It is not hierarchy. It is not competition with teachers. It is structural self-understanding. When your identity is stable, your decisions become steady. When your identity is unclear, your practice becomes reactive. You do not have to be loud to be authoritative. You have to be aligned. And alignment is teachable. Now that we have defined professional identity, we need to examine how it functions internally. This is where the concept of role cognition becomes important. Role cognition refers to the internal narrative you carry about your authority within your position. It is how you interpret your role in real time, especially when decisions must be made quickly. Many paraprofessionals operate within perceived boundaries that are narrower than their actual scope of practice. The distinction between perceived limitation and documented responsibility matters. When perceived boundaries override actual scope, hesitation follows. And because identity influences decision-making, inaccurate role cognition leads to inconsistent professional action. Clarifying this internal narrative is not about expanding your role. It is about aligning your perception with reality. Imposter syndrome is a psychological pattern in which capable, qualified individuals doubt their legitimacy, even when objective evidence confirms their competence. It is not a lack of skill. It is a distortion in self-perception. In educational environments, particularly in layered systems with visible hierarchy, imposter syndrome can appear subtly. Paraprofessionals may meet licensure requirements, complete professional training, and accumulate years of experience, yet still question whether their insights count in instructional conversations. This doubt often leads to overdeference, waiting unnecessarily, minimizing observations, or avoiding professional input out of fear of overstepping. When imposter syndrome interacts with narrow role cognition, it reinforces a diminished internal narrative. Strengthening professional identity interrupts that cycle. When you understand your scope of practice accurately and align your perception with documented responsibilities, the internal distortion weakens. You are not assuming authority. You are operating within it. Correcting imposter syndrome is not about ego. It is about accuracy. Professional agency refers to your capacity to act intentionally within your defined scope of practice. It is the difference between being present in a classroom and being professionally engaged in it. Professional agency matters because educational environments are dynamic. Situations unfold quickly. Behavioral shifts, instructional confusion, emotional dysregulation. In these moments, hesitation can either stabilize or destabilize the environment. When paraprofessionals understand their authority and operate within their documented scope, they act with steadiness rather than uncertainty. Agency allows you to implement supports without waiting for unnecessary permission. It allows you to document observations accurately. It allows you to communicate concerns in professional language rather than personal frustration. On the job, this translates to consistency. Students experience clearer boundaries. Teachers experience reliable collaboration. And you experience reduced anxiety because your actions are aligned with your training and responsibility. Without professional agency, paraprofessionals may default to passivity or swing toward overreach. With professional agency, practice becomes balanced, ethical, and purposeful. Agency is not about expanding your role. It's about fully inhabiting it. Now that we have defined professional agency, we can return to an earlier claim: technique alone is not sufficient. Educational systems often assume that if paraprofessionals are trained in strategies, consistent implementation will follow. In reality, application depends on internal alignment. Skill without identity clarity produces hesitation, and hesitation disrupts instructional stability. Before any strategy can be executed effectively, the professionals must perceive themselves as authorized to use it. Thought precedes behavior. Perception precedes execution. If your internal narrative questions your authority, even well-learned techniques will stall under pressure. Professional agency determines whether skill becomes consistent practice. This is why we are addressing cognition and perception before deep technical training. Without alignment at the identity level, no strategy remains stable. Before we move into our key takeaways, I want you to pause and apply this thinking to your own practice. Consider where hesitation appears. Does it show up in redirection moments, when behavior needs immediate response? Does it surface during instructional adjustments, when a student struggles and you instinctively know a modification would help? Or does it emerge in team communication, when you have observations but questions whether to voice them? Notice whether the hesitation is rooted in lack of skill or lack of perceived authority. Those are different problems. Skill gaps require additional training. Identity gaps require internal alignment. Reflection is not self-criticism. It is diagnostic clarity. Professional growth begins with accurate self-assessment. As we come to the end of this module, let's create a clear anchor. First, professional identity shapes behavior. How you understand your role determines how you act within it. Second, professional agency stabilizes practice. When you operate confidently within your scope of practice, your actions become consistent, ethical, and purposeful. And third, perception precedes technique. Before any strategy can be applied effectively, you must perceive yourself as authorized and responsible to use it. Identity alignment strengthens agency. Agency strengthens execution. This is why we began here. Before definitions, before legal frameworks, before technical skill training. In this module, we focused on internal alignment, how professional identity, role cognition, and agency shape your daily practice. But professional confidence cannot rest on internal clarity alone. It must be anchored in structure. Educational practice does not operate informally. It is governed by law, policy, and documented responsibility. In the next module, we will examine the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, commonly known as IDEA, and how it defines rights, protections, and expectations within special education systems. Understanding this legal framework does not expand your role. It clarifies it. Identify establishes confidence. Structure strengthens authority. Now we move from perception to policy.